So what is today's topic, Dylan Senpai?
Oh yeah. So today's topic will be about the government, the role of government, and how we can create a better system by fix or sort of tweaking government. And we'll just discuss
So,
different ways to restructure. Yeah.
I see. So basically, okay. I understand. I understand.
Okay. Yes. One of the things that I wanted to start on first was, I guess, just to address what we think about government first, maybe show our personal biases. So I guess we can start off. What is, in your guys' opinion, supposed to be the role of government?
I
I
think
mean,
well,
okay. You can go ahead.
I kind of believe in what Socrates said, how like the government should be controlled by the virtuous people, the people who are ethical and virtuous, the people who are intelligent, not just intelligent in terms of like IQ, but intelligent as in like ethics, virtue, compassion, all those traits. Virtuous people should be in power, not people who are rich, not people who have been passed down, not not people who have been given power because they were born into power, but people who are truly virtuous. And the examination for virtue, I don't think you need to examine virtue. I think it's already you can already see virtue in people. So
I mean, I just think that government is set in place of anarchy. There's no system of. It's chaotic, and a government exists in order to quell that chaos, and in order to make things much more collected and calm and collected. And plus, governments allow for humanity to, or for a society to have a set of rules, and then the governments enforce those rules as well. So then people have an incentive to follow those rules. Otherwise, if there was no government and there was a set of rules, I don't think anyone would follow them. It'd kind of be like the purge.
For sure. For me, since I'm gonna go right now, I think it's really hard specifically for me like to define just because it's such a general question, like what type of government would you specifically want? I think it would be easier just to say that, for example, I would value I know that Safik just mentioned Socrates. For me, I would value a system of government like a democratic form of government. So I think it was a quote by Winston Churchill who said that, it's a really bad system, but it's the best that we got. It's better than all the alternatives. So for me, the type of government that I would want would be to represent the overwhelming majority of people, which is what a democracy does, and would allow people to, to have certain unalienable rights. Like it's a little bit, I don't want to go too deep into it because it's like a really broad question. But generally speaking, a democratic form of government that secures people's rights, if necessary, a state that has a monopoly on violence, although I don't like states particularly. If that's necessary, that's probably something we would have to do. But that's just generally where I speak. I think once we get deeper in the conversation about what specifically we want to change, then I'll talk about it. But for now, that's like generally what I think.
Well, we kind of like went off. We kind of didn't answer the question. I think the original question was, what do we think government should do?
Well, I think to the extent that government should give people certain, it's like kind of general, right? Because it should give people certain freedoms while restricting them from other types of things. So I would argue governments should be able to give you, the freedom of speech, expression.
So the system of government, the question of system of government hinges on what is the best way to ensure that the government will serve the people. Because I mean, a fascist state or monarchy would be completely fine if it was completely solely motivated by serving the people which it controls. But of course, as we all know, that's not possible. Like people inherently become corrupt. So it comes down to like, and then a democracy is just sort of like, how do we safeguard from that happening, But it all comes down to like, what's the best way to ensure that the government serves the people?
I think this question can be broken down even further to like who rules, who are the people that are being ruled, and what methods are being used to rule. So these three questions can ultimately kind of break down the question. So in my opinion, I would say the virtuous people rule over the people who are ignorant. And the way that is being ruled is that there is not strict punishment, but there is some type of education conditioning that is being given to the ignorant people by the virtuous people, and so this way the society balances between the ignorant and the virtuous people, and these virtuous
But
people
then
will always.
wouldn't that be institutionalized racism in a sense?
That's not racism because
I'm saying racism because I don't know how else to say it, but it would segregate the people.
Classism.
Yeah, classism. Yeah.
no, we're not putting classes. We're talking
Okay,
about
so
good
you're saying,
deeds.
what do you mean, virtuous people and then there's ignorant people?
Right.
That's
What do you
clearly two
define?
different
What do you?
classes.
Yeah. The problem is
Yeah,
that
define
who
both.
defines what
Okay,
virtuous people are the people in power. They define it, and then the
so
worry is that
virtuous
those.
people,
Yeah.
themselves are those who do not want the classes. They want virtuous people are those who are selfless, and
So
so they will
Marxists, they don't want
take
I think
classes.
I think I think
Like,
what
in what sense?
we should I think the definition we should use is in this context is Plato's philosopher king definition for what constitutes a virtuous person, or basically someone who examines themselves and examines their
examines.
understandings
Yeah, so
and
that's
doesn't
the
allow their
axiomatic belief.
emotions to
Yeah,
like.
so they don't allow their emotions to take control of their intellect. They act virtuously, selflessly. They examine themselves in society, and so that would be the belief. And inherently, this does not break the like this does not go back to the caste system or the racial system, segregated system, because inherently virtuous people are those who are able to deconstruct their own label. Like kings won't, they would do anything for their pride, but virtuous people are those who would give up their own pride for the sake of
But then
the
again,
people.
but then again, if, power does make people do crazy things. So how can you say that these virtuous people, like, how can you say with confidence that these so-called virtuous people will not get drunk from the power that they
The,
have
the
and
point
take
of
advantage of it?
so I come from a belief that when a person has been truly virtuous, he has given up power, and his main motive is not to control people, but to educate people. And so, education, you might look at the teacher as powerful, but in the end, the teacher, the, it's your interpretation of the teacher. If they look at them as powerful, the system might be shifted around. But I think the whole point is the person who is truly virtuous would not look at his subjects as lower than him, but rather subjects that are just ignorant. And people, I think, can understand this, that they themselves have predispositions and they're ignorant. And to get rid of this ignorance, they need to look at someone who has already gotten rid of those predispositions. So therefore, look at a virtuous person.
Wait, so I just have a question on that. Like, how would the society choose a person
How would
that's,
they be held accountable
They're
as well?
like
That'd be
they're
another
how would
line of
like
they,
their
they're
yeah,
race,
irrefutable.
right?
How could then how could they in a position of power, as you said, these virtuous people who, while
Mm-hmm.
self-reflecting, you said respect their subjects. Would it then the goal of that society to be to question the role of the subjects themselves, or in any case, at least to hold them accountable to their actions? If we can't, like,
No,
I
no,
don't
no,
know how
Alan, you're looking at the
society.
wrong place here. The problem is that a virtuous person would never want to be in public office in the first place because they wouldn't want power and they wouldn't.
Because they would recognize that the power this
Yeah.
is corruptible. I mean, yeah, to something. I even if were to like put that to the side, right? If a society like this could exist, I don't understand how like there would inevitably over either the course of time or just the amount of people who get into power, there's going to be somebody who's not virtuous, who's able to slip by, and how do those people how
Okay,
are they held accountable?
so I also thought about the same question. Like, how do we keep with time? How does virtue become passed down? Because the first set of people will be virtuous and they'll be committed, but then the next set of people who are maybe less virtuous, how does the system continue? So to this, one answer could be that the people that are virtuous select the next set of virtuous people, select the people in the society that are most virtuous, that are least corrupt, that are least ignorant. They select those people, and those people themselves are agreeing to the fact that they themselves will not become corrupt, and so And so this system passes down through this kind of phenomena, and it kind of does come at some point where people rebel and say, well, you know, this will just become a familiar thing. Like families will only pass it down to their families. But again, going back to the axiomatic belief, a virtuous person is that person who's not looking for himself, but is looking for the society. So he won't just pick his family like a king did, but he'll pick people that are truly virtuous. I think it's a little bit ideal, but I think through enough conditioning and through enough
Just a
education,
little ideal.
It's too idealistic.
Yeah,
No,
there's no.
That's
It doesn't
basically
account for.
utopia.
I mean, I would,
It's
I
not
would probably,
utopia.
I think it's an interesting idea. I would argue actually that possibly if through, because I believe the where we need right now, politically wise, democracy is the best that we have so far. I believe that maybe with the transformation of the economy within another maybe 400 years, if we can get to Star Trek, that'll probably resemble that type of society. But also because the way that I view it, right, how maybe we could get to Sattvic society is almost it's through the lens of like historical materialism. So like the material need of societies and how they shape human societies. So going through like feudalism, through capitalism, and then to eventually evolve into something else. So I think that naturally through the course of time, if we're able to evolve and transform the economy, which inherently now, let's say, looks for certain things such as profitability or selfishness, is slowly over time transformed to more so align with values of democracy and liberty and fraternity over the course of time, then I think we could get somewhere close to his society. I think that's interesting, though. We could get there, I think, at some point. It wouldn't be a utopia, but we can get something close.
Yeah.
At least the society would mirror the values that Sophic talks about. I think that could be possible someday.
But how does such a system deal with external noise? Because I mean,
Well,
in the
that's the
real
thing,
world,
though,
there's noise in the
philosophical.
system.
I think, you know, the thing is, I think, I don't know, like, we could go, I think, back and forth and ask, like, what about this or what about that? I think it's because, like, what Sophic said was more like a philosophical framework. You know what I mean? Like, we could ask questions other like, how are people held accountable? Or, like, how is this, how is that? I think, like, he just described a society that he wants these elements to be promoted, but he obviously didn't state how or in what way. You know what I mean? I don't think
That's going to take time. It's going to take time for.
We can't answer those questions yet. Whatever
Yeah.
form that takes,
Well,
it'll
I mean,
take.
the answer seems kind of. There's one very apparent answer, which is just everyone is educated very well.
I think what we have to do, the only way you could like extrapolate this, Ashwin, is that if we say, okay, we want this society that Satvic's talking about, these virtuous people, we then have to look backwards. We have to look backwards from our conclusion and say, okay, what kind of a society can we structure that would best fit what Sattvic wants? So what do you guys think? I think that would be the only way we could really determine, like, what society do you think you would have to create? Like, what values, what political structures, like, what do you guys think? What society would this have to take?
Well, to avoid like the concept of you like intellectual majority ruling a large population, you have to just make sure everyone is virtuous and intellectual. That way, we avoid that pitfall.
That's never going to happen. Even as an optimist, I would say that life.
Well,
is
through a good education system, through a good education system, and I feel like if we use the technology we have today. Like technology could completely phase out the working class, which is not necessarily a bad thing because it leaves up a lot of people to pursue more intellectual human occupations that are just acting as a robot and allows them to educate themselves.
I do agree with you to some extent. I think that society would require the abolition of class. Just because of the fact that class is such a massive factor and plays such a massive role in society as to who gets what, who owns and who works, how like 99% of the population works, has labor to get money for that labor, and 1% of the society owns. The majority of their wealth comes from owning, not working. So the class divide would have to be bridged at some point because there's too much, I would say, class conflict between the interests of the working class or the CEO capitalistic class. There's too much of an interest. For a society of virtuous people, you know, when you have conflicting, I would argue, class interests, like the owning class, who would much more so is looking for profitability and is looking to make as much money and profit off people as possible, while diametrically opposed, people who work for labor and get money for their labor want the most amount of money for the least amount of labor. Those are two diametrically opposed forces that obviously I don't think a society of like virtuous people, because they'd be two conflicting forces. You would need to probably abolish class as a concept, so people wouldn't have like completely diametrically opposed interests, because they'd have to have the same amount of interests, right? If as long as those two groups are both against one another in terms of where their interests lie,
I would like to add on to the point that I agree that there should be no class, but this transformation of going from class to classless has to be natural. Can't be revolutionary.
And wait, in one sense, like reformist versus revolutionary. Like, what do you mean by natural?
No, it has
So
to be
he's
natural.
basically trying to say that it shouldn't be like a bloody revolution like it was for the Russians.
Yeah, basically, yeah.
Oh, wait, so you believe
I mean,
in
we don't
change
know
from
that.
above,
It could
change from within the
depends.
system?
Because you have to remember, guys, the revolutions that, let's say, happen in authoritarian states like China and Russia, the parties that took over were all intellectuals who attempted to form authoritarian states themselves. Usually when revolutions like this occur, the experiments like in, if you guys heard of the Spanish Civil War where the anarchists were fighting against them, many libertarian currents, at least up until now, have failed. Only authoritarian experiments have so far succeeded for one reason or another. A lot of material reasons why. I think that, like, what I'm saying is, I don't know. It could be through evolution.
Here's the thing.
Reform. I don't know.
Here's the thing, that a virtuous person would never want a bloody revolution. He would always come to reformative actions, or
obviously,
like let's just take for an example mental health. Criminology could be decreased so much if we just educate people about themselves and educate people about their mental health, give proper education in school, and we do this at a lower extent. But if we can raise that, we can stop so many crimes. In just that moment, we have lowered so many bloodshed, we have lowered so much death, we have lowered so much illness just by educating people. So there's a lot of power in virtue and education. I think we don't need to always go for wars and battles. I think there could be still a revolution, a non-violent revolution, as Gandhi would say, a revolution that takes place without any blood. It could still happen.
I guess one thing I'd like to add is, like, how would we do this? How would we educate more people? Should we just, like, do you guys believe in like a more top down, or do you guys believe more in like a grassroots?
No, grassroots for sure.
Grassroots.
It has to be grassroots, because I think it's shown throughout history that whenever you have top-down attempts, either at authority or in power, almost every time it turns corrupt. So, like a great example is, let's say, in the Bolshevik Revolution, when, for example, before the Bolsheviks took power, many workers had their own worker councils, or everything was from a grassroots. The workers involuntarily wanted to either overthrow the Tsar and then later the government, the provisional government. It was all from the grassroots down up. But as soon as the authoritarians took power, they reestablished the authoritarian currents and introduced a top-down system. I think that could breed corruption, and then it doesn't actually transform the society. You would need a popular revolution or a popular vote or whatever. You would need something from the ground up.
Yeah, I agree.
Sorry, go down.
Oh yeah, I think I'd agree with that in terms of like a entire revolution, but I was thinking more about in terms of education, or like, because I know you guys talked about how education is super important in the revolution, and I was just thinking about, like, let's say Cuba, although very authoritarian state, did implement a
very successful campaign.
very,
I remember that their illiteracy rate went from like something high in the high 50s or something to like down in like the 10s or 20s or something like that. I remember reading about that, and I even wrote about it in
what was the
papers.
nature of that? What was the nature of the education that was being provided? It wasn't an education promoting people to arrive to conclusion by themselves. He was feeding people things.
It was
true. That's why I would argue against authoritarianism in general, because
I mean, if he was feeding people information, then wouldn't you think that less
people ideals?
No, even then, a lot of people ran away.
True, but every government does that. That's not a government of just that. Like the U.S. is that, like on all of our textbooks.
So that's the problem, right? Like, even look at our own textbooks. like every single textbook we've had has tried to justify the electoral college, and it's like all sorts of crazy stuff,
You know
right?
that the textbooks in the north are different than the textbooks of the
Yeah.
south of the U.S.
I'm pretty sure there's one textbook in Texas that's banned because it talks about the Civil War. I remember, I think it was in like middle
Right.
school.
And then in Kentucky, they have like creationist schools and all sorts of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I just think that, like, I agree with you. It's not good that some of these books blatantly try to promote almost a propaganda-esque source of information to feed. But I think that's almost the problem with almost any form of government. Like, if we go back in time, obviously monarchies, if they could at the time, like printing presses, would just try to promote the monarchy as something stable. After that, regardless of, I think we could all agree republics are better than monarchies. But republics still published, obviously, propaganda.
Right. So like
promoting
the question is
the goodness.
in a hierarchical society, would such an education, would such a free thinking education ever be promoted?
Like, I feel like
It
if
would
you
require for what
Possibly to promote like I wouldn't. So I think if in that society, I don't think they would like do it like Cuba, like glory to the state, or like the Communist Party, but they would probably, I'm not sure, but I think there would be, like, you have to look at it from the perspective of, who gets out of it, who gains from putting that stuff in textbooks, right? It's the government and overall the stability of the government. So I think that probably there'll be something just to increase stability, or like like your belief that the country you're in, what they're doing is right.
And here's
Right, 'cause
It's
one
kind of
more
fuzzy,
thing.
but you know what I'm saying, right? I'm like,
To
I
educate,
don't think the world will.
like everyone, you have to first educate the educators, so the teachers, the people in power, like not power as in like the people who have like education degrees. People, we have to educate them so that they can educate more people. So if we get the top people that educate, like college professors, things like that, intellectual people like that, if we can get them to educate properly, because I know there's so many professors who have their own biases and who just straight up go into classes that and then share their own beliefs. The Jordan Peterson's straight. I don't
The
even.
J.
Right, but that's the thing. Like, there's like in a college campus, in a college campus setting, it's impossible to escape from like both views. So that type of thing isn't really so dangerous in that specific setting, but it is more dangerous in a setting where you're more prone to only hearing one view.
I guess yeah, you're right.
I mean, like, if we were talking about like mandatory education, I wasn't really thinking like in like a after a revolution, then you have it. I was thinking more of like, let's say in a democracy where that already exists in places like the United States, for instance. If you make like education more available, if you say, okay, it's illegal for a kid to miss this amount of school, you must allow the
But
kids to.
that's already here. That's already
That's
there.
already good.
These
Yeah.
laws are already here.
Yes.
I think what pisses me off is like this concept of like good sensibility, and that some things we can't talk about them in school because it's not
Oh
sensible.
yeah. Yeah, that's stupid. I don't like that. How
And
the whole environment, like the I and like suppose I, right? The whole environment, like we're so smart. We're like smart people, better than other schools. But then we go to school and then we see all these like we see people like Bashir, and like then we realize, oh, this
okay,
is
so
just
let's not cyberbully people.
Actually, like,
my bad.
no, not of him. Just like give examples of like, what do you guys think?
But like no, but not to pick point, but like we see like how the environment is just shaped by like a bunch of these groups that are like I don't know. I wouldn't say non-ethical, but like just different. I
Well,
don't want to.
let me
Like
give a real
clicks.
life example.
Yeah,
So
Action's better at this.
I was proposing like talking about Pakistan, India. This was during the
Oh yeah,
Kashmir thing, like when they cut off the electricity to Kashmir, and I wanted to write an article about it. And one of the teachers, without even reading the article, immediately saw the title and was like, "No, there's no way you can possibly run that."
Why do you think is that?
Well, I think didn't we go over it in government class? The reason why a lot of schools have the I guess the administrative power to ban or to censor and do everything is because within the framework that they can censor whatever they deem that will
Right,
promote.
everything is deemed detrimental to the school's environment,
Yeah,
but that's
like
such a
it'll.
broad definition. You can
Yeah,
just start putting everything that you don't agree with or everything that like you don't want will tarnish the reputation of the school. You can just say, oh, it's not promoting a good sustainable like school environment.
yeah. I don't really agree with that because like it's so vague, and you can apply that to anything, which is why something like that you tried to present that would actually like that affects a lot of young people at our school for
Also,
like demographic reasons, you know.
you should
Like,
have like. Oh, go ahead, go ahead. Okay.
oh, I was just thinking like, yeah, it would maybe cause a bit of like uproar, but maybe it's
Mhm.
necessary for ideas to be bounced around.
Not good for the school though. Not good for the school's image. So we know who benefits from censoring articles.
Oh, I guess this might, if we expand this idea long term or on a bigger scale, it kind of goes into a topic of authoritarianism. And as we've seen throughout history, authoritarianism, although it's been very like all the authoritarian governments have all, there's still authoritarian governments out there, and we've seen many authoritarian states, although how cruel and against like human rights they've been, they have been pretty efficient states at getting their goals done,
Like
whether
China
it
right
be
now.
yeah. I'm not advocating for those. I'm just saying that they are efficient
Okay.
than like
Yeah.
a democracy. But what is the give and take from authoritarianism? Like, is it ever justified to give more
This
power
is
to?
this brings to mind the argument that like this philosophical conservatives of today make, like, oh, Nazi Germany had universal health care, therefore universal health care is bad.
I mean, the thing is that it's almost like I think Chomsky at one point he was talking about in an interview. He's like, yeah, totalitarianism, it's a deeply flawed ideology because I think because it's the belief of every person, right? No one wants to make, well, except from like psychopaths, no one wants to make the world worse. Everybody in their own way, whether you're a Nazi or commie or whatever, everybody who thinks in their own mind they want to make the world a better place, and authoritarianism justifies it by necessitating that, oh, we need this massive state, or we need this massive control of the population because in the end it'll bring about these X, Y, and Z what we want to develop. I think that you would have to argue like on the basis that when you look at personal freedoms, I guess you could even argue in the USSR based on like consumer the amount of wealth compared to other nations, right? The standard of living. I think it would depend per scenario, but the amount that you would lose in an authoritarian regime is what makes it, at least to people in a democracy, is so unattractive. At least in most scenarios.
But then the material connection we have to things is the exact thing that stops us from reforming our own democracy. So we look
Wait,
at an
explain
authoritarian
that.
state. We look at an authoritarian state like Soviet Russia, and we say, oh, look at that oppression. Look at the lack of good standard of living they have. We don't want that. Then we look at our own lives, and then we think of what we would have to give up if we implemented some sort of socialist policies. And then we say, oh, we don't want that either.
Well, wait, what socialist policies? What do you
Yeah,
mean by
which
that?
ones?
Well, okay, so like universal healthcare, right? So
That's not a
like,
socialist policy. That's just
Yeah,
like
So
it's
so you know what I
it's
mean. You know what I
socialist,
mean.
but
Socialist
it works
it's
in
Democrat,
a
just
whatever
the
you.
government
com
owning. It's just the government owning like being the only the one carrier for healthcare.
Okay,
Socialist.
I'm sorry. I don't. I'm sorry. I'm not well versed in my isms, but you know what I mean. And people will lose things. Like people, not everyone. Majority of people will gain, but the people who lose things are often the ones that are the ones that have the power to put them into action, and they don't want to because they will lose things.
Yeah, you mean
Wait,
like
what do you
the
lose?
lobbying interests for sure. Sorry, Dylan. What do you want to say?
I'm sorry. Oh no, it was just more like, what do you lose in a universal healthcare system?
Well, if you're an insurance company, you go out of business. If you're a health
yeah.
insurance
I
company, you
mean,
go out of
except
business.
if you're an insurance company
Yeah, but
that's
those are the people
profiting
that
off
have the
of.
power, right? Those are the people
Yeah.
that are actively like lobbying against these things with their dollars.
Yeah, yeah, Alan, you were talking about interest groups. and stuff.
Oh, no, yeah. I just basically said what you said. Like, yeah. So that's the thing, is that I wouldn't mind if all these companies were to one day disappear. Like, yeah, there could be a problem with these employees who need to find new jobs, but for the overwhelming majority of people that have to pay massive premiums and massive amounts of money, they've done study after study that's found that we would save at least around $3 trillion over the course of 10 years with some kind of a Medicare for all system. So it would not only save the whole country money overall, it would also it works even in principle, because companies aren't looking to profit off of you. The government is the only one who's negotiating with hospitals and says, okay, you're going to put these things at this and this price. We're not looking to make money. It's like almost all. I remember there was when I went to, for example, when I went to England, right, in London, they have the underground, right? In London, believe it or not, they actually lose money. The goal is to lose money. They don't make more. They don't gain money by people using the underground. They lose it. But they know that, but it's a public service. So in that way, people aren't profiting off of you, and it's less expensive. I just think that's like a general argument. That's why almost all westernized, industrialized nations have adopted some version of government um, supplied Medicare for all.
I was just gonna, this is kind of off topic too, but I think when it comes to education, sorry, I'm going right to education. When it comes to
No, it's fine, yeah.
education, it goes to media too, and Chomsky is a big advocate for this. But you know, teenagers learn so much of their stuff just from social media and just from news and just from internet. If the internet company, if the internet providers or the media itself, or perhaps whatever websites they're on, they themselves are created for consumerism, and they themselves are created to entrap youth, corrupt youth's mind. Then that's just, I don't think that's right. Instead of developing kind of consumeristic side to youth, I think there should be like other things like Khan Academy, for example. Just take for example, like, such a great opportunity like for everyone, literally, and it's been so successful. And it started off with such a simple concept of giving free education to people of various subjects, right? So things like that. But on the other hand, youth is just focused on things like, I don't know, TikTok or freaking Twitter, whatever that is. Not to say those are bad things, but it's just that is advocated for. That's more popular. And I'm not saying completely get rid of the fun things, but I'm just saying there should be some kind of advocation for education and educational platforms on the internet as well.
I guess going off of that, we talked about healthcare and we talked about education. So I guess we've kind of determined that these are needs of the people. Like the state would need to provide these things for people if we decide that the government should. And I guess there's a question like, what is involved in that social contract? What kind of social contract does the people from the governed have to the authorities and vice versa?
In the role of the state, you mean, like in that relationship?
Yeah, like what should the government provide to its people? I guess what is it morally supposed to,
Contract,
if
right?
there's morals?
Well, the idea is you follow the laws and the constructs provided, and you get the benefits, right? But the problem is it's not abundantly clear sometimes how following some of the constructs are beneficial or what they lead to. And in some cases, it's just outright false that following those constructs are beneficial anyway. But if you get to the point where people understand, like, what this entails, like, I follow this, it'll help me down the road, or it'll help someone else. Even that's how you get to that point where that's the social contract, right?
So this basic concept, do unto others what you would do unto yourself. That would be like a basic, very minimal contract. Like people would be like, going back to virtue, people would be told, if you act virtuously, you'll be acted upon virtuously too. The law of karma.
So like I guess in like countries like the United States that don't have like a universal healthcare system where it's just like private entities, like it's not seen as a that's the government is supposed to give you healthcare. It's not in that social contract, I guess. In places like the United States, but in other
Because it's like
countries,
come back
even
to propaganda, right? Almost propaganda, like this idea that's always pushed that the free market will come to a balance point and it'll come to some determined price, and that price, the equilibrium price, is what it is. It's like the right price or something.
Yeah, it's the revitalization of those ideas, which has been happening for the past like 30 years. That's true. Yeah. And I mean, you're completely right about that. And it's because of the interests that groups, especially private corporations and companies have, obviously, in distilling it because they benefit from it. Because
Hey
for
guys,
the monopolization and oligopolization.
wait. So I guess going off of Alan's idea that like there's a bunch of special interest groups, companies with a lot of power and corporations. How, to what extent are we governed more by the corporations or people that have money rather than the institutions of government?
you guys see, there's a game that kind of tackles that point called Cyberpunk
What you
2077.
talking about?
So in that game, basically the government's basically the government are the companies that provide for the society. So in a sense, it's like each sector in the game, each sector of the city is controlled by a different a different company,
And
and
Oh, yeah.
and
That's
so
utopia.
yeah, basically it's like how it's not the government that really controls their society. It's more like the companies that control, and the government is trying to get that power back into their hands. But yeah, I don't know how else that game's gonna turn out because it hasn't come out yet. But yeah, that's the basic concept.
Yeah, I'd agree with that because even going back again to the Lord Chomsky, he talked about specifically about Dylan. You asked about the power of corporations in society and versus the government. Is that this is why Chomsky would classify we have now as even a version of state capitalism, because the state, while ironically they talk about laissez-faire capitalism, actually plays a decently good role in the creation and the subsidization of the economy. And so the thing is that what's worrying is exactly what you mentioned, what he mentions, is there has never been, I think, almost on either only in the Gilded Age, there has never been more collusion and collaboration between corporations and the government up until this point, like right now. And supporting the structures of power, while, as you said, the institutions of government are actually eroding away, like they've been eroding away for the past 50 years. Because what's interesting to me, guys, if you didn't know, like we talk about countries like Scandinavia and Germany and France as being almost social democratic, but the U.S. after World War II, once Western Europe was almost destroyed, was actually, if the same level, if not much more so, social democratic than it is now. It's just that over the past 50 years, those institutions and laws have been slowly been eroded over the course of time, till we have the situation now, where
because of the
for
Cold War,
30,
we
oh
needed
yeah,
that
right
idea.
there. Yeah, plus that. Plus, I would argue the growing interests and the growing power of capital over the past 40 years and the centralization has caused many of these institutions to be, to erode away and to not be able to protect people. And then, as well, as you said, to push propaganda. So that's my take on it.
So then, who's saying that we don't really live in an like an ANCOM, or not ANCOM,
And
ANCAP like
I mean, no.
society
As
right
long as
now?
there's a state, as long as there's a monopoly of violence over an area, yeah, we don't live in any ANCAP. We don't have McNukes yet. All right, that's at
I
least the
mean,
beginning.
Elon
yeah.
Musk would like to have his own little Tesla country, though.
Of course you would. What is it surprise? It doesn't surprise me.
He wants his own Tesla planet.
Dude, like he wants his workers so bad. Remember what happened 2 weeks ago, dude? He wants his workers so bad. He'll colonize Mars just to make it a Tesla
This is
factory.
weird guy.
He's like one of those like tech guys, like Steve
A
Jobs.
technocrat, I'd call him.
Yeah,
Well,
like all these
that's true.
they're
Like
like,
it's like,
oh,
oh, we can't get in the way. Anything that gets in the way of technological processes is immoral. We have to get rid of it.
Dude, I swear. Dirty.
Give all of your attention to technology. Technology will save us from our future.
Yeah,
It'll
for
save us
sure.
from
But
our
who's
dreams.
controlling that technology? Nah, don't think about that. Just think of the cool new iPhone you're gonna get next year.
So what is it? Are we moving towards cyberpunk, or are we moving towards Big Brother?
Right now, we're
Is
moving
the
towards Big Brother.
is the government
Question.
getting control? Is the corporations being?
True, but what I find interesting is that I think we're moving. Like, here's the thing: I think we have two paths in the future. What I mentioned before, Star Trek, where the machines are our
Gee.
slaves, and they create the material that we need, right? So you can imagine it. I know there was a good episode on Star Trek where like this one woman from like the early 2000s was like time traveled, and she's like, "What? You guys don't get paid?" And she's like, "Yeah, we don't have money in the future. Money and class are abolished." Like that's what we could get, because I know Ashford, you said correctly that a lot of labor could be made unnecessary because robots will do it, which is actually a good thing in the end, because I think it'll allow people to use their creative talents, and with democracy will at least ideally be uncoerced. But I think we're going down the matrix where, because it's not the way that we can get to Star Trek, I think is only by democratizing the economy. The way it is now, where look, it's funny to me, 5 or 6 years ago, around 60 people held half the world's wealth. You know how many hold it now? Only 5 years later, around 6 people hold half the world's wealth. Like, it's centralizing to a point where like the interests of capital and money are going to be so extreme, and going to have the only leverage of power that it's going to be beholden to their interests, you know? So to me, it'll make sense that if one day, and I was talking to Mr. Doherty about this, that one day all the capital and wealth will be hoarded and will be in the control of a tiny minority of people, while the rest of us are held to try to survive with no meaningful way to move up in the social ladder, because obviously robots will take most of the jobs, you know?
One of the things like
Wow.
anarchism is like you shouldn't follow any particular
Rule set
choice,
or
rules, or
yeah.
actions.
No, anarchism, no. I'll define this for you guys, just because I was watching a video from Chomsky. Anarchism is just an ideology that specifically advocates for the removal of unjust hierarchies. So, for example, that's why anarchists would say we would want to abolish the state, because in their minds, the state is a coercive institution that gives,
Right. Well, I understand that. I understand that part, like the abolition of hierarchical power structure. But
that
what
unjustified.
confuses me is in the process of abolishing those power structures, you need to create another power structure in order to take that one on.
What do you mean?
Well, a bunch of people that aren't organized can't like change anything. They can't change
That's
the
the whole point of
government.
anarchy.
Well, no, it isn't. Anarchy would be highly organized. Nothing about anarchy says it wouldn't be organized. Anarchism has a government. Anarchy, like this, I know this. It's a little troubling because it is really muddy. Like, people are muddied over what anarchy means. I'm not talking about anarchy as in there's no organization. Anarchism as a political philosophy. I think you can look on Wikipedia if you guys looked it up. It's like a political philosophy. So the removal of unjust hierarchies, but it would still be a government. Things would still be organized. There would not just be a massive state that would intervene on behalf of some.
So
I don't
basically,
see how we can get to that.
anarchism abolishes all governments.
No, not
And
government, only the state. The state is abolished.
no. But the state is the government, but
No, it
it
isn't.
replaces it. It replaces it with cooperation or something like that between the
Yeah,
people rather than
mutual
the.
aid and cooperation. But Jay, we got to be specific here. We're going to talk about anarchism. The state and the government are two completely separate things. The government is the structure by which we govern. So, for example, representative democracy.
So basically, they want to have a society where everyone can. It's a society where everyone cooperates and everything is done willingly rather than being forced. For example, the government, it forces us to do things because if we don't do a certain thing, we're punished for it. Or if we do a certain thing and it's considered to be bad by the government, we are punished for it. While in anarchism, on
Well,
the
I
other
mean,
hand,
anarchism, you could still be obviously punished for something, but it wouldn't be a state. It wouldn't be a massive force, a military force that would, like, for example, let's say we're in Soviet Russia, right? We're like pretty authoritarian. We got a massive state, and we're in Ukraine and we're farming, and the government comes in and says, "Okay, listen, we need this grain. You're gonna give it to us, or fear it, right?" And let's say we say no. Well, either the army could come in and using state power could justifiably, or not justifiably, but could use violent force on us. So what anarchists would say is that the power of the state is unjustified. It's not democratically elected. There's nobody who has any actual. It's not controlled by the people. It's just this. It's the centralization of this massive amount of authority that isn't justified, and we want to get rid of it. So that's still, obviously, there could still be, for example, let's say like a revolt comes up and people like, we want change. Yeah, that could happen, but
So you can't have
wouldn't be
cops. You can't have
no, you would have cops.
military.
No, you would have cops. From what I understand, you would still have cops.
What police are
Or like a
most-
militia, more or less.
Yeah, it would be
Not like
yeah, exactly. It would be a popular militia, or would be a police force, but it would be organized and would be voted on and elected by the constituent population. It wouldn't be decided arbitrarily by people in power.
So my question is, so I see like, yes, the end goal seems seems good and fine, but in the process of reaching that end goal, I don't see how we could get through that process without being corrupted or someone taking power or someone abusing
Well, that's the thing, though. The power that anarchism is specific. This is like why people talk about, for example, who are anarchists or even socialists would talk about how, or how even Marxists would talk about how, listen, liberalism, it's good and all, but it's outlived its usefulness, because while liberalism has good in the sense that it gives political democracy, it supports capitalism, which we fundamentally don't support because it's autocratic. So what anarchists would attempt to do is then remove, they would agree with liberals on the political aspect. They'd still keep democracy, or even liquid democracy if we can get that far in the future. So a much easier form, or much less uncoerced form of democracy, and also democratize the economy under the control of everybody. So in the sense, if there's someone corrupt, well, no worries. Then workers at a company could just vote them out, or people in a town hall.
Right, but to like get to that point, right? Workers in the company themselves have to be able to think for themselves and realize what's going on.
Well, true. That's
I
why
really don't think we're at that point yet.
The government. That's the point. They would expand on and keep a democratic form of government. In some scenarios, even more democratic, because I think a lot of anarchists support not represented democracy.
But like, look at Athens, right? Look at ancient Athens, where a lot of things were decided by democracy. But what brought the downfall of Athens? It's like it's the demagogue, right? Popular demagogues, where people start making decisions based off of emotion instead of like focusing on rationality.
But here's the criticism, Ashman, is that I could apply it to anything. I could say, okay, look at the society we have now in this democratic form of government, right? Okay, well, it's somewhat popular enough a demagogue could come up. That's a problem in almost any democracy. That's intrinsic to it. That has nothing to do specifically with anarchism. Like that criticism.
I'm not saying. I'm saying like in the process of getting to anarchism.
Like, what do you mean?
Can we get through that process without corrupting what our end goal will be? How do we ensure that someone?
Well, I mean, an anarchist would argue it's better than the alternative, saying that the direction we're going in now is almost neo-feudalistic, and would probably, like, with neo-fascism rising around the world and nationalism in Europe, like, anarchism sounds pretty good to me. That's what they would argue, which they're not entirely wrong. I would get why their perspective. It's like if you were to ask somebody, why would you, like, what you're saying, oh, we're worried about the outcome. Well, you could ask in the 18th century, like liberals in the French Revolution, well, you're kind of worried about the outcome of liberalism, right? Like, with the chopping of heads. But they would say, yeah, but it's liberalism. It's better than living under a monarchy. It's just, you can't, I guess, it's like, that's kind of like, you just got to, what else can you say?
I think what I'm trying to get at is, like, a lot of criticism for anarchy probably comes from, like, the question of its practicality, or criticism that people just talk about it and don't actually act on it.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's like, in any case, it's like a good that's a fine critique. It's just that for me, this is why, like, so, for example, I'll tell you, like, one flavor of anarchism that Chomsky is. He's an anarcho-syndicalist. It's basically a fancy way of saying that instead of having, you would abolish the regular capitalist form of production, and instead workers would own all the companies in, like, a massive, what's it called? Like a super trade union, a trade union of trade unions. So all workers are democratically represented. Yeah, exactly. So, like, all the workers would democratically represent themselves and would have the control over the means of production, they themselves. and they would control it instead of one person owning a company in the pursuit of profit. Everyone would.
But
own
see,
it.
like if we can get rid of the working class, if we can totally get rid of that.
Oh yeah, no, I mean, yeah, anarcho-syndicalism could become inept if AI takes over and can get us to what he wants even faster, like socialism, but instead of you can even abolish like the commodity form even quicker.
Mhm.
Like yeah, for sure. But I just think so. Actually, you know what's interesting that you bring it up, getting rid of the working class. Up until I think you can completely get rid of it, what would happen in the meantime is what Chomsky would argue why you would want workers owning it is, for example, if you got an owner of a company, right, and he has a bunch of workers, and he's like, okay, well, it's way cheaper for me to get some machines, and they'll now do all the work, and I'll just fire all my workers, which is what a lot of the times happens, right? What a worker co-op would do is they would say, well, no, we're not going to fire you because we all democratically own the company. Firing each other would make us lose our jobs. So what they would do is they would have the robots do like some of the labor, so you would get the same pay and work less. Or you could work more and earn more. No
Isn't
one would
that
fire.
what we have now?
But I think
No, we
the
don't have
idea
a
of
worker
like
co-op system right now.
No, we don't. This is like a 5% of the U.S. economy. I think it's worker co-ops. They're a very small amount.
yeah, but the idea of the this happened in like Australia in the 70s with like anarcho-environmentalism or something like that. But like workers
You mean?
Oh
would
yeah.
protest in factories to change the like if their factories producing like environmentally harmful practices or stuff, they would go on strike until they changed those
Yeah, but I mean,
practices.
I would argue that anywhere in a anywhere in a companies or corporations like chain of resources like labor or where they get the materials from, there will be exploitation anyways. Like I commend companies like I don't know if you guys have ever heard of it. It's like a Swedish company that makes backpacks. But they are like super environmentally friendly. Like apparently the materials they get are like ethically made, and I appreciate that. I just honestly think that at the end of the day, the materials for almost any regular corporation there will be some exploitation somewhere because the system requires some form of exploitation somewhere down the road, whether that's for the pursuit of profit or for outsourcing workers somewhere or paying them slave wages or something like that. You know.
Alan, you should minor in political science.
I'm educating myself, man. Like all the stuff that I've talked about so far. Like just watch some interviews with Chomsky or like on your free time. Like none of
Just
it. Like,
Chomsky, bro. Straight up
Yeah,
everything.
we don't need to go cows on anything anymore.
listen, guys, I haven't even read the Bread book, the infamous anarchist, the conquest of bread. I haven't even read that.
Oh,
thing,
yes.
man. I know all of this. I haven't read the Bread book.
So
I
what do
guess-
you think about the idea of like violent revolution? If we can't trust the system, can we trust the system to change to come from within the system, or if we can't do that, do we have to resort to violence?
So that means do the means justify the result? Is that what you're saying?
The ends justify the means.
In that sense, I mean, here's the thing. From like being completely honest, I think we'd all be in this and say like, if it were to come through reform, it would be way better. No one wants to kill people unnecessarily. That's just stupid. No one wants to do that. I don't know. It all depends on the historical, the conditions, the materials at the time. Like,
But I mean, like, we have to take the world as it is, like not how we want it to be, right? Quoting the Nick Fury from Avengers.
right? Yeah. I mean,
Look at what's happening in Minneapolis right now. Like,
yeah. I mean,
clearly.
I mean, listen. If we were like these revolutionaries, like, all right, guys, we're going to stage a revolution. What are we going to do? We got to be like, well, listen, we got to look at the material conditions. Where are people at? Are people radicalized? Are they not? Or like, do we have the conditions to like? Do we have popular support? Like, the idea itself, I don't like it. Just as much as anybody else doesn't like violence. I think that's just the question for what's going to happen. I don't think I think like the question itself of like whether one revolution is needed is like, I don't know.
Like, are we Martin Luther King, or are we Malcolm X? Are we Gandhi, or are we Bhagat Singh?
Personally, I would say Gandhi.
It all depends on your perspective. Oh, sorry.
No. I would just say even like this has happened before. I mean, bloody revolutions have happened before. There's no point to giving up the present for the unknowing future. Like giving up your society and your
Our country was born in a bloody revolution.
That's true.
I feel like if you're, yeah, bloody revolution sometimes is necessary, but if you try doing a bloody revolution in a stable state, it's not gonna work. If it's crumbling, like all the like Russia, if it was like Cuba, if it's crumbling already, you can do it. I guess I wanted to say something about like Ashvin bringing up Minneapolis. Like, yeah, those cops, if nobody said anything, those cops would probably still be in office. The thing is that because it got covered so well, and because there's been other events like Eric Garner that have like already taken place, these cops have been fired. But I mean, you still have to get them, you still have to push more to say, okay, these guys should be arrested more than being fired. Like, if you keep on having like this, I guess, not propaganda, but if you have to keep convincing people like, yeah, this is right, this is wrong, we should aim for this type of society who holds everybody, including enforcers, accountable, then I guess, yeah, like you can't just say that. I feel like revolution would have to be gradual in that sense, because like you can't convince everybody that it's like right and then do it, especially in the very like
Yeah.
what we
I
live in right
Yeah,
now.
and if you
I
try to
think,
like, oh,
but that's the
okay.
end of the day. What Dylan, what you were saying is that you can't convince everybody. But that's the thing, right? It's like if we're gonna get down, guys, to the nitty gritty about like political ideology and like what you would believe in. At the end of the day, like however much you would, people would talk about how we need to respect other people's political ideology. Over the course of history, it's like you either win or you lose. Like you establish fascism and you win and your state survives, or you don't, or you lose by somebody destroying your state. So at the end of the day, it's like regardless of who's advocating for it, it's like who just gets in the positions of power and who's able to win. That's like the nitty gritty of like how like governments form or change or die or transform.
I think we have to kind of go back and tie all this to dualistic human behavior. How a perfect society or utopia that communism or even any anarchist would believe that would happen. There would be always good and bad people. To simplify, there would be always rebellions. There would be always people who want to change the current system. Like another 100 years back or before that, like people didn't want that system, so they changed it. They went through revolutions, and then now we have this system. But then now we have rebellions in this system. So this will be always a kind of concept that will be happening in any system that you are in. So this has to be in the back of the brain. Like we have to understand that we always be revolutions, and we always be kind of this change. There will be always a small section of people that will be wanting to change the current society. So in the end, a perfect society is almost fallible, I would say. And so the strive shouldn't be to create a perfect society. I think the strive should be to create a moralistic society, a society that is built on morals and philosophies, not a society that is built on a conclusive a result or having a mindset in your like. I think that should be like the goal. It should be built on like philosophies rather than like a goal of having a particular society.
True, I'd agree. I just want to say one thing is that when you're talking about that we should look for moral societies and ones that aren't utopian, from that same cue, I don't think that, for example, like let's say either an anarchist or even eventually communist society, none of it's necessarily utopian. They just propose ideas like ending class or ending an economic system. I think there was a good quote by a guy, I can't remember what book. He wrote a book. I can't remember exactly what it was, but it's like it's easier to see the ending of this system than the beginning of a new one, like pessimistically. Like it's way, like for us now, like climate change, economic instability, it's way easier us like right now honestly to perceive how this is going to end rather than what's the next stage, what are we going to create out of the ashes, or what's going to come next.
So
And
I
then
think
if you can spark that imagination, or the interest in having people to be motivated to see the next society or whatever come to fruition. I think that's also important.
So I think both of us are trying to get at this, that instead of looking at the specificity of events, have a moral justification to what we're gonna do. So inevitably we'll do the correct things, and inevitably all our events in society will end up following the ideology, instead of looking at subjectivity, like each individual event, and trying to have ideology about like each individual sector of government. Have a general moral basis that can then lead us to do only that which we would want in our society.
I guess kind of, yeah.
But then, like, so the concept of people always there's the risk that you'll always consistently continue questioning everything that you're built on, and you'll never be able to establish anything because you're constantly questioning everything. So what do we do in the face of that?
I mean,
I think
anything. I mean, the one, I think you're right. And I think when we had a discussion, I don't know if it was 2 discussions ago or 3 of them, I think I mentioned that similarly, like how if we have to keep questioning everything, we can't have a base of what to move forward on. I think we would have to look at, like,
does this come back to Churchill's quote?
Kind of, but I think it all depends on, like, if we're going to be really, like, big picture here, it all depends on, like, what you value philosophically and what conclusions you came to and how. And then you either, you look, like, honing in on different critiques of either the economy or the political sphere, and like, oh, maybe this is better, maybe this is worse. And then you come to your own conclusions, and then you read more, you share more information, and eventually you just develop your own political identity that you can, base your change on. Like, it's true, we can't just keep questioning everything endlessly because there's no groundwork. But I think if you take the time and you're able to analyze as much information around you, you can become with, like, a decent framework. And, by talking to people, you can change your mind. And, it's all about, you know what I mean? It's all about, like, just development, like keep learning, keep developing,